Welcome back to Take Two, a discussion of the times, current events, and politics. I'm joined as always by Adam Matlack and Mike Pomerantz. Today, my question is: are government restrictions going too far?
All right, thanks, Richard. We are fired up today. We've got, for me, it started with trying to get into the decision from the Wisconsin Supreme Court that basically overturns the governor's lockdown order. And I started to, I just want, you can read the article separately, but I just wanted to see what are the legal positions to opening up the lockdown from a judicial review perspective, and what are the political ramifications. On the legal side, there's a lot of procedural stuff that the court is saying they didn't do, and I don't really want to get into that. I'm much more interested in getting Adam's take on this, in the concept that the court said, look, you're going too far. You're basically taking unlimited prerogative. You're saying you have all the power to shut everybody down, to lock them in their homes. And, we're not saying that we know where the limit is, but we're saying that you went too far. And to me, that's not a helpful argument. That's an argument about people who have made up their mind in advance that they don't like the lockdown. Should the government have the power to limit your movement, to respond to what everybody agrees is a calamity? I mean, and I'm not really meaning everybody. And maybe you, Adam, think that this is not that bad. It's been made way worse by these original, very negative predictions. But my point is that some amount of regulation, some amount of restriction, when it is backed up by science, when it is supported by an overwhelming majority of the scientific community, and then is still supported by the real-time data that comes in as a result of those measures being taken. In other words, social distancing works. Once you've got that information, is it wrong to make an order like they did in Wisconsin, which is limited in time until the president's own benchmarks are met? And the court said no. When you're waiting on benchmarks, you're open-ended. You might keep this order in effect forever, which is a totally disingenuous argument. Obviously, the governor does not want to keep the economy closed. He doesn't want to kill the state, but he doesn't want blood on his hands either. And you say, well, listen, people die all the time. There's always somebody who's sick or somebody who's dying, and you gotta wake up to the real world. Take your red pill. My point is that it's such a unique set of circumstances. It's so contagious, and there's so little that's known about it, and there's no vaccine. There's no flu vaccine. They got this inflammatory Kawasaki disease that's showing up in children in New York. We don't have any idea about that, other than all indications are showing that it goes towards COVID-19. Shouldn't the government be allowed to take some measures? They should not have a blank check. It should not be open-ended. But man, the one in Wisconsin was tied to benchmarks. And the court said, oh, no, you're just going to do this forever. You're never going to let people out of their homes. And that's not the real world. So I realize there's an inconsistency, there's a cognitive dissonance, because at some point you can get me to say that's too much. You're going too far. But man, under the circumstances, we're nowhere near that. And yet people are screaming like stuck pigs because folks like Fauci are trying to save their lives. So forgive me if I get a little fired up, but there is such a thing as a moderate and reasonable amount of regulation, especially when it comes to public safety. Let me get your take.
There's a lot there, and I understand the passion behind it, and I appreciate it because it matters. This is stuff that matters. I think a lot of people often talk about this, that there aren't lives at stake, there aren't futures at stake. You hear people reference the old saying, the cure can't be worse than the disease itself, and all these little sayings. I mean, obviously, hopefully that's true. And in the opportunity cost benefit analysis here, as we sit there and say opening and all these things, and Mike, you and I have talked specifically about trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we make that judgment call? How do we get the data for that judgment, to be accurate? There's a lot of people tossing these numbers, people dying from COVID, but not actually, being marked that way, but not actually dying that way. There's a lot to deal with here. So I'm going to just address the first question, which is it too much? It depends on how it's being enforced in a lot of ways, in my opinion. Highly suggesting people or saying, look, we're shutting this down or doing that. They probably have the power to do that. Should they be putting people in jail who don't follow these orders? Probably not, which means enforcement is the most important thing for me. So when you're trying to figure out enforcement, if it's not being enforced, the law doesn't matter. There's a bunch of laws that we don't enforce at all. That's just up to the, cop or whoever's sitting there, the DA or whatever. Jaywalking is one of these classic ones that's against the law, but it's not enforced. So there's two sides of this: how it's being enforced and what's being written. My take is that, especially the Wisconsin stuff, as little as I know about what's actually happening on the ground up there, I think you're probably right, where it's like these people who hold dear to their liberty or freedom or supposed freedom, whatever you want to call it, are very afraid of losing that. And I can appreciate that as somebody who's afraid of the, and it's not even tomorrow. Oftentimes you say, what's the end? What's the bottom? Where does this get us? And it's not so much that it's hard to make a giant leap from this is too much, from something that's reasonable. But for me, it's a war of attrition. Our freedom and our liberty hasn't been taken away like that in America. It's been chipped at and weakened over and over as every new law passed. Can't do this, can't do that, need to do this, need to do that, need a license, need a voucher, need all these things down the line, until one day you wake up and you're that frog. You can't throw him into a boiling pot, but you can turn it up when he's in there, and he'll just stay there because it's just boom. And that's my fear. And that's kind of like, put on the tinfoil hat kind of thing for a second, where, we're going to be in gulags. It's not going to go right there. But at some point you have to draw a line, in my opinion. And that's what some of these people are trying to say or do. And maybe it's too early. Maybe that line's too early because, and I'll bring this up just quickly before I pass it back off. I'm a Christian, and I believe in doing the Christian thing and caring about people around you. I talk about personal responsibility greatly, and I say and put a lot of responsibility on all individuals to take care of their own health and take care of their own family respectively. I try to do that myself. However, I also take great care of the people around me. I try to be respectful. I try to take into account what their needs are, because that's what I believe. Now, the question is for me, though, is like, because I believe that, should I impose that on somebody? And where that takes us, even if it's for the good, how do you measure? That's the real question I have, Mike, is how do the legislature measure, or how do they figure out what's essential and what's not for these individuals? And I mean, that's the real question, because that's what's being said.
Yeah, the way it's measured, and maybe this is going to undercut my own argument, but I have a certain feeling of sureness, of certainty, that the way it is measured is through elections. So you can, or population movements. I mean, I left Pennsylvania because I didn't like the law. The law and its administration in New Jersey made more sense to me. And that's part of the reason why I moved over here. I didn't have to leave for work. I didn't move that far from where I used to live. So you could have a geographical relocation if you're talking about a local regulation. People are free to leave Wisconsin. But the other part of it is that they, and this is the part that might undercut my argument, people are free to vote for the legislature and the General Assembly and the state Senate and the governor that they want. So when the governor and the state legislative body can't get it together, which is exactly what caused this terrible situation in Wisconsin, then things really break down. And maybe this personal responsibility is on the elected officials in that instance, because at some point, Wisconsin said, we like whatever his name is, Evers. And he's the governor, and he's responsible for this rule, this harsh lockdown order. It is harsh. It's more harsh than what I have to do in New Jersey. At the same time, they also voted for the legislature, which is usually a shorter term. So now you're getting a mixed message from the people. Well, maybe things are working out just fine in Wisconsin, because in the light of that mixed message, the executive did what I wish the federal executive had done: err on the side of caution. Save lives now. If it's wrong, let's sort it out as quickly as we can. But err on the side of caution. You're always better to do like the NBA did rather than run people out there like in baseball. I mean, you're a baseball fan, I'm baseball. People were freaking still playing games in spring training after the lockdown had started. And what were those dudes going through? They were like, they already decided this isn't safe, yet we're still here. The commissioner looks like an idiot. Yeah. So I think the way you measure it, and I know it's hard, but the way you measure it is with elections. And if you have inconsistent election results in that the state legislature, none of whom have to ever go in front of the entire state, they just go in front of their local area, and the governor can't get on the same page and don't stand for the same things, well, then they got to work it out. And the fact that the court has to come in and work it out here is a shame. That's not really how it's supposed to work, especially if you're in the realm of public safety. It may be that there was overreach here, but the court didn't do a lot to help the situation. And now, and also the way they made the decision, it was kind of like, Governor, you can't do anything, okay? Because freedom isn't free. And that's it. And that's not good legal argument. That's not a good legal argument. So I don't know. I'll be very interested to see if in the next couple of days they try and fix the lockdown order to pass what the court gave. But the court's guidance is pretty much like, don't ever try and do this again, which to me is going too far the other way. So once the court is involved on one side, the legislature is involved on one side, and the governor is sitting by himself on the other, I don't know. It'll be a great experiment. Like what was it? The mayor of Vegas was like, use us as a test case. I guess we're going to use Wisconsin as a test case, see if everything's okay.
Okay, so the argument is, from at least I'm getting it right here, I think, is that
throw the bums out.
The elected officials, they decide what's essential and not essential for us, and we decide who they are. And the only way we can correct mistakes and things like that, we just wait until we vote them in, right? Vote somebody else in.
Yes.
The answer is voting. I gotta say, for me, I'm nowhere near that. I mean, I think I can't determine. Look, if we're being serious, we're being 100% serious. If you want to stop the virus in its tracks, you want to be serious, and you want to say, oh, the government's going to go and do what it needs to do. Why is Lowe's open? Why is Home Depot open? Why are these things that are deemed essential open? Don't tell me. Don't get these. Everything you've seen so far is a half measure. There's not a single full measure in place. It is a joke as far as I'm concerned. And this idea, I mean, just 2 months ago, the government, Fauci telling me and everyone else, you don't need masks. You shouldn't even buy masks. You having a mask on is saying that other people won't be able to get a mask. I mean, it makes no sense. There's a ton of half measures going on around here, and it's not going to do anything. So, in my opinion, and this is what I think is happening here, and this is why I'm pissed, is because what's happened is that the measures that have been put in place aren't going to do jack to stop it. Okay, Corona's going to be here in 6 months, just like it's here now, because we're not squashing it. Okay, it's not happening. All the half measures aren't doing really anything. It's still here. There's 1,000 new cases a day in Texas, and those are, mind you, all the tests are lagged. Anything when you come out and say, oh, okay, here's today's test result. No, that crap was contracted weeks ago during the lockdown. All these new tests that are hitting right now were contracted during the lockdown. And so this idea that, these half measures are going to get us somewhere, all it's doing is literally crippling both feet. Don't work. Don't go over here. Still hurt yourself, but don't prevent it. It's not beyond all the problems I have with the government coming in and telling me what I can and cannot do. All right. I mean, they do this in a lot of my life, and I accept it because I want to live in America, one of the greatest places on earth for now. And I want to be here. I want to follow the rules. And I totally agree with your assessment that you can just move. It's one of the greatest things. Voting with your feet, voting with your legs is real. And I applaud you for sitting there being like, I don't want to live here. I'm going to move here. And that's an American thing. And it goes all the way back to the 1800s and before. It's like, this place sucks. I'm leaving. A lot of people need to have that attitude. That's a self-responsibility attitude. That's sitting there saying, they got it right. You have it wrong. I'm not going to just cry about it. I'm going to go over there. And so beyond all the problems with the chipping away at our liberty and my liberty, your liberty, our personal liberty, and the trade-off between security, or what I would argue as perceived security, not actual security, because the lockdowns aren't secure. They're not actually making it safer. All these places are open anyhow. These people are out. I've seen it because I've had the respirator on. I've been out. And so, and keep in mind, I want as little death to happen as possible. I do. But at the same time, we do have to live. These arguments are, there is this giant teeter of, which one would you rather have? And a lot of people go too far with it. But at this juncture, my rebuttal to you, and I want to extend it just a little bit here, just a little bit, because you say that we're supposed to vote for it, right? What happens, just in this, just imagine for me for a second here, is that what happens if they actually did a real lockdown where nobody is allowed to leave their home, to squash it? It's a full measure. They're going to put a full measure in place where 2 weeks, everybody's locked down. You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to do all this stuff. If you show any symptoms, you need to call this. What happens then? Are you for that? Will you be for that?
Would I be for it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm already working at home a lot. I could probably withstand it personally. I think the bigger problem is that our friends in the religious communities would not be for it. In other words, they were some of the last folks to close. They have a whole suite of different rules that apply in terms of gatherings, in terms of funding, and I would expect that kind of lockdown, although it might be tolerated by me, wouldn't be tolerated by the religious community. And I would just add to that I think that the half measures do work, and I would, prefer to call them moderate and reasonable decisions. But I agree that the first thing I think about, and I think you and I are like this, is the first thing when somebody gives us the plan and they say cloth mask, and then they say Home Depot can stay open. And all of a sudden, it's very clear to us that we're looking at half measures. And I think so I go out with gloves on. Well, then I take home, I get my stuff, I come home, I take off the gloves, I throw the gloves away. Well, I wipe down the packages. Well, what if the packages touch my clothes? Now I got to throw away my clothes? Well, isn't it a half measure if I don't burn my clothes, or at least put them right in the laundry, and so on and so on and so on? And this is how you and I think, because of our interest in self-reliance and personal responsibility. And I'm not sure everybody thinks that way, but my argument is that something is better. Now, maybe the data proves that I'm wrong, because it sounds like you're saying a little bit that, the half measures are only just prolonging the agony.
That's
And
exactly
we may have been, I'm not saying that you're committed to this point, but we may have been better off having a much more agonizing period of time over a much shorter period of time, as opposed to, I mean, it looks like we're going to the end of the year, if not beyond. My kid's school isn't going to be open in September. I'm sure it's not.
my argument is the R0 or R naught score of and that's the transmission value or factor for trying to determine how aggressive the shared or spread of virus is about 2.4. We know that to be pretty scientifically accurate. We thought was 3.8. What that means is that one person that's infected in a normal scenario would infect 2.4 people. It can move very fast, and so and because of the long incubation period, it's really just hard to track and figure out all this stuff. My point is that if you are really trying to fix this, if you really cared, you would take a much bigger and much more severe shorter term measure to try to actually fix it, because it would send the message. Now, I got enforcement problem with that all along the line. It's problematic, trying to prep people, but in reality, that's a way better plan to sit there and be like, look, for these 2 weeks, in 3 weeks or whatever, no one's going to be allowed to do this. No one's going to be able to do these things. These are all, and like that would have been, because then it would have been prep. We would have been able to prepare for it and do all these things. That's not what happened, because this is a part of the point, though, ultimately, is that the government's not agile enough to deal with this. I mean, even prior to this, you were talking about how we have all these resources. Well, we do, but they're run and controlled by morons. And so the resources, I mean, you give a 4-year-old, the budget of the federal, government, what's he gonna do? He's like, well, I bought a lot of Duplos. You guys, is exciting. I mean, that's essentially what's happening here, is that they have the capacity to make or buy enough masks for everybody to wear. But that hasn't even been a discussion. They're pretending like, oh, just don't wear the mask. We just can't do it. I mean, what in the hell? The idea here that any of the people involved with this stuff, and this is ultimately the problem, and I'll be done. But the idea that any of these people involved are experts, know how to even identify an expert, know which scientists to listen to or not. I know plenty of scientists that you should not listen to. They are not. They might be scientists, but come on, man, they're not really good scientists. There's good doctors and bad doctors. Everybody's had a bad doctor. The C equals degrees is real, man. It's just one of those things. So the idea that I'm going to hand over my choices and my freedoms and to a elected politician, if I elect him or not, her or him or whomever, if that's the option I have, I'm choosing no way voting is going to solve this stuff, because they're just not going to be able to do it nearly as well as me making a choice for myself, and my neighbor making a choice for themselves, and you making a choice for you, and so on. So for me, yeah, I don't know if that got us anywhere or not, but.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you both for your thoughts. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to like and subscribe below, and we'd love to hear from you in the comments section. Thanks again, and be sure to join us for the next edition of Take Two.